His gills slowed, not by choice. The autonomous rhythm shifted to survival mode, the gill rate of prey, not fleeing, not fighting, just filtering as quietly as possible in the presence of something that doesn't need to hurry. Have you ever realized you were already caught long before the trap even closed? That same stifling stillness. Spymaster Vecon had first felt it 47 days ago, floating before the glowing decryption console in the intelligence station's primary subpool. The deep accord had formally severed peace with the Terran systems. It was a calculated strike of diplomacy and force, meant to cripple human expansion along the perimeter. Vecon's operatives had immediately intercepted a priority human transmission bleeding across the border. The decryption software chewed through the code for 3 cycles. It produced only a single fragmented word: run. Vecon stared at the aquatic display, his cranial ridges flushing with predatory satisfaction. A warning. The humans were warning their embedded agents to flee Delvari space. It was the expected reaction. It was the correct reaction. But the water around him soon grew stagnant with confusion, and the deafening quiet began. The Delvari Grand Fleet pushed outward, obliterating a critical human supply depot. They fortified their borders, primed weapon batteries, and waited for the counterattack. 72 hours later, an identical human supply depot drifted into the exact coordinates. Automated drones welded the structure together, restocking fuel cells as if the previous station had simply experienced a mechanical failure. Nobody mobilized. Nobody retaliated. Beneath the station's waterline, the filtration units hummed a steady, monotonous rhythm. Vecon dispatched shadows into human territory, expecting wartime industry. Instead, operatives transmitted footage of Terran merchant fleets trading and bureaucratic hubs functioning with nauseating normalcy. They had declared war. Humanity had filed it under minor correspondence. His aide swam into the command center, datapad in hand, and asked when humanity declared war in return. They hadn't. The Delvari declaration of hostility was physically located in Earth's digital archive under the folder marked miscellaneous, pending routine review. Impossible. Why hadn't they fired? Vecon accessed the military network feeds himself, bypassing his analysts to search for the concealed knife. He found it buried in public lunar infrastructure data. Human engineers had constructed a massive network of mass drivers spanning their moon. These magnetic accelerators were originally designed for mining, but Vecon recognized their true capability. They could launch dense kinetic projectiles at escape velocity using nothing but electricity. It was an automated planetary defense system with infinite ammunition, capable of flattening any advancing armada without requiring a resupply line. The kinetic force of a dense slug moving at a fraction of light speed made direct military engagement futile. Humanity didn't need to mount a defense. Their mining equipment was already a deterrent, mathematically guaranteeing Delvari annihilation. Yet those systems remained in low-power standby. The operators were logging regular sleep cycles. If the sheer scale of human indifference fascinates you, subscribe to our channel to uncover more classified archives. The total absence of retaliation became a contagious psychological poison. It seeped directly into the Delvari Senate chamber, a half-submerged amphitheater where the ruling class quickly began to tear itself apart. Without a tangible human fleet to unite against, paranoia bloomed. Senators violently accused each other of fabricating intelligence reports to orchestrate a coup. Fleet commanders ordered bloody purges of their own lower ranks, convinced that invisible human saboteurs were erasing the war from within. Trade partners from neighboring star systems quietly severed all economic ties with the Deep Accord. They were terrified by the sheer lack of human reaction, assuming that if the Terrans were not firing back, they were merely taking their time to prepare an absolute erasure of the sector. Vecon floated alone in the primary observation tank. The subpools of the Central Intelligence Station were turning hopelessly stagnant. Maintenance engineers had abandoned their posts weeks ago, terrified by rumors of invisible Terran death squads that never actually existed. Bekan watched the tactical displays in absolute, suffocating isolation. The water around his suit tasted of metallic decay and unchecked algae growth. Entire Delvari sectors were burning on the holographic star map. The military had turned its own plasma batteries inward. Admirals executed their own captains for suspected treason. An entire civilization was collapsing under the crushing weight of an enemy that simply refused to strike. He had spent his life studying the art of war. He knew how to counter invasions, how to bribe officials, how to poison water supplies. He did not know how to fight an adversary who simply ignored him. 87 days after the formal declaration of hostility, the primary communications relay chimed. A high-pitched mechanical whine pierced the heavy water. It was a direct, unencrypted text channel originating from Earth. Bekan's webbed fingers trembled uncontrollably over the console. He braced for the mass driver launch coordinates. He braced for the kinetic strike that would finally shatter the station and end this unbearable waiting. The transmission contained a single line of text. "Your allies already know. Check your communications." Bekan lunged at the interface. He rerouted the station's diagnostic logs to the diplomatic servers, his pulse pounding a frantic rhythm against his skull. He traced the outgoing data streams through the secure network architecture. The truth was worse than any kinetic bombardment. For 47 days, every single internal Delvari communication, every paranoid Senate hearing, every localized fleet purge, every panicked order to fire on their own citizens, had been silently carbon copied. The data had been forwarded to every other species in the galactic arm. The Terrans had breached the Deep Accord's secure networks on the very first day. They hadn't sabotaged the infrastructure or planted false flags. They had simply opened the curtains. The rest of the galaxy had watched the mighty Delvari Empire tear itself to shreds in real time, entirely unprovoked. And now, floating alone before the main decryption console, the terrible gravity of the trap finally settled into his bones. His gills slowed, not by choice. The autonomous rhythm shifted to survival mode, the gill rate of prey. Not fleeing, not fighting, just filtering as quietly as possible in the presence of something that doesn't need to hurry. He looked back at the original intercepted transmission from day one. It was still burning brightly on the auxiliary monitor. The Delvari decryption software had worked for weeks, but had only ever translated one fragment of the code. Run. He had thought it was a panicked warning sent to human spies. It wasn't. The Terran intelligence network had intentionally let his supercomputers crack exactly one word, just enough to trigger the Delvari predatory instinct, just enough to convince them a shadow war had begun. They had planted the seed of terror and stepped back to watch the roots tear the foundation apart. The message was never meant for humanity. It was meant for him. The water in the chamber felt thick and suddenly devoid of oxygen. Those 3 letters glowed against the dark glass of the monitor. They were no longer a piece of intercepted military data. They were an epitaph for an empire that had executed itself out of pure fear. His atmospheric suit failed to compensate for his sudden biological panic. The primary gills along his neck sealed shut against the foul water. Along the edges of his jawline, the wet skin finally began to crack. What happens when the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy is absolute silence? We will uncover another classified archive tomorrow.